Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English. That mouthy young man over there, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. My good friend and colleague, Chuck, it's great to see you. How are you?
It's great to see you. It's been a very long day, as you know. But
it has been.
I'm happy that it's going to end on the note of just the millennial and the boomer going at it.
Do. I think that's a sitcom. We could do that. That would like in the theme of a 90s.
I think they had that. That's called Sanford and Son. Maybe before your time.
I love Sanford and Son. Just love that show. I won't delay it and go over my favorite scene, but it's a great show. Do watch it. Okay, so this is an article you wrote. This is called "Does High Fructose Corn Syrup Feed the Wrong Bugs?" A reader asks. We dig in. So here's the very brief summary, Chuck, and then give us the details. So you say, one reader asked about the relationship of high fructose corn syrup with an abdominal malady experienced by her son. Her concern might not be entirely wrong, but like most things involving the gut, the answer is both tangled and controversial. Okay, untangle and uncontroversialize this for us, Dr. Dinnerstein.
Okay, so her son was affected by a condition whose name was quite surprising to me. It was called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And what that means is that, let me step back and say that when we talk about the microbiome, the microbes that live in our gut, they live predominantly in the large intestine. There's very few bacteria at all that live in the small intestine because the small intestine's job is to take the food that's been broken down by the stomach and absorb the various nutrients from it. So the small bowel does not like to have competition. For various reasons, in this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, intestinal flora develops, and it competes with the mucosa for nutrients. And as a result, people that have this condition, when the nutrients are absorbed by the bacteria do their thing, and among the things that they do is they ferment the sugars and other nutrients, and they produce gas. So as a result, people that have this condition experience bloating and various aches and pains that go along with it. As I read more and more about it, I was thinking back on my training, and I realized that this was a condition that the surgeons dealt with long ago called blind loop syndrome. And it's basically the same kind of bacterial overgrowth, and it occurred because when surgeons were operating on people for ulcer disease, before we discovered it was due to a microbe and not due to some other problem, when we rearranged the plumbing of your stomach and intestines, oftentimes we would leave a small loop of intestines that was hooked up in such a way that it allowed things to stagnate, among them bacteria. And that's where the condition comes from. So the way you can think about it is that in blind loop syndrome or SIBO, bacteria are not where they're supposed to be. They're misplaced. The condition that her son had seemed to be made better when he stopped taking in fructose, you will find in some of the ultra-processed foods. And that, as it turns out, is a slightly different problem. And there is a condition called fructose malabsorption in which fructose is not absorbed properly in the small intestine and continues on its merry way down to the large intestine, where at that point the bacteria get a hold of it and go ahead and do their processing and once again form gas and other components. So in this situation, it's not so much that the bacteria are misplaced, but the nutrient, fructose, is misplaced into the wrong area. And the reader was asking whether I could explain a little bit about the difference between the two. It's a tangled problem because SIBO, blind loop syndrome, is not really a disease that has classical markers. It's a syndrome. It's a set of a collection of symptoms and complaints. I get gassy after I eat. My stomach gets blown up. I feel nauseous. Those kind of things, rather than saying it's elevation of this hormone or that particular metabolic level. So that always makes it difficult for doctors to make the diagnosis when we're trying to diagnose a constellation of symptoms rather than a disease that has one or two markers that we can quantify in some way. The test that they use for doing this is pretty straightforward. Is they feed people a meal of some sugar, usually glucose, but you can use fructose, and they see whether these people produce an abnormal amount of gas, and they can measure the amount of gas by measuring the exhalations of individuals. So basically we feed them some glucose, we wait 20, 30 minutes, we hook them up to a machine, and we capture their exhalations and measure the hydrogen. The difficulty becomes that, as you can tell from both of these situations, gas is formed. So we can say that you have an abnormal source of gas in there, but we can't tell whether it's the misplaced bacteria or the misplaced nutrient. And that was the situation that the son of our reader found himself in. And she was a little bit, I guess, unhappy with being left with what was a good clinical outcome. But as a clinician, I was more than happy to take the good outcome and not worry so much as to whether it was due to one or the other of these two problems. I mean, you can certainly go back and repeat the test with glucose or do some other things, but the alternatives for getting a direct answer were a lot more invasive. So I think one of the takeaways that I found interesting here was that this was a case where we were using a biomarker as the diagnostic sign because getting a direct measurement was far more invasive. You could actually pin the diagnosis down by doing an endoscopy where we would put the patient to sleep and run about a half-inch long tube down their stomach into their small intestine and take samples of the bacteria if they were present there, take cultures and see if there was bacteria present, and we can make the diagnosis. But given the choice between having that tube down my throat and being unconscious, or maybe having a quick breath test, I'm going to go with the less direct, less specific breath test over the more invasive one. So I think that that's a generalization that we see with a lot of places where we're concerned about how doctors diagnose things. The other thing that I found interesting about this, and I think this has a lot to do with talking about nutrition in general, is that diet may trigger or amplify symptoms and not be the cause of them. And I think that that's the case with any number of problems. So if you have some type of blind loop syndrome, or you have some kind of fructose malabsorption, high fructose corn syrup and those kind of things are going to amplify those symptoms, but the fructose per se is not necessarily the cause of the problem. You can make a similar kind of argument about all the people that have decided that they are gluten intolerant, when the reality is that they're not going through the tests that would prove the case because they're going to be more invasive. So it'd be better just to say, I'm gluten intolerant and get on with life.
So maybe in other words, don't drink 4 sugary sodas in a day. Maybe drink 1 every couple of days.
Well, the heuristic that we use in medicine on the clinical side when we're talking about outcomes is perfection is often the enemy of good. And I think that was certainly the case here. Maybe less satisfying than one would like. But if the symptoms have resolved with relatively simple changes, we don't have to put a label on what the cause of that is. We don't have to further medicalize the problem. We had a problem, we altered our diet, we're good to go.
Well, I mean, how am I going to get grant money if there isn't a problem I can define and study? I think that's what we really have to focus on here.
Well, I think you can definitely still get grant money because it's a very interesting question of how the microbiome has developed, and it's interesting because, again, there was no microbiome when I went to medical school. I went right before Cochrana's postulate, so bacteria was a whole new area for us. And you see today that more and more we're beginning to see how the microbiome modulates our behavior in any number of ways. The old line, "I contain multitudes," has a greater and greater scientific meaning today than it did back in the 1800s when it was enunciated.
Yeah, I remember reading Dr. Paul Offit's book, Overkill, from a few years ago. I think it's what it's called. But it's all about mistakes that have been made in mainstream medicine. And it's interesting coming from someone like him because he's as legitimate as it gets as far as everyone in science and health is concerned. And there's a chapter on the gut microbiome. Because I remember even within my tenure in the science world, which isn't terribly long relative to your career, the initial reaction was, well, this is the new chiropractic, this is the new supplements, blah, blah, blah. It's just another health scam. And then better research came out and people went, hey, wait a minute, there's actually something to this. So it's probably still oversold in certain quarters, but nevertheless, the microbes that live in your stomach can impact your health in some important ways, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, in fact, just to under the shameless advertising cause, I wrote the other day about the role of beets and beet juice in hypertension, and as it turns out, the way the beet juice lowers people's blood pressure, and it lowers it by a clinically significant 4 millimeters, is because of the fact that the beet juice is affected by the oral microbiome. And that's what changes the beet juice into something that the body can use and subsequently lower blood pressure. So there's still a lot to be learned. So by the way, and in keeping with that, the people that were using Listerine were wiping away any chance they had that the beet juice was going to help them out because it was just a carnage. Oral carnage for the bacteria.
Yeah, that is fascinating as we wrap up here. I wonder to what extent there are phenomena we thought we understood about health. Take this medicine, it has this impact, and to what extent that is impacted by something going on in your gut. So it may not be that we discover a new cause of a new syndrome. It could just be, oh, we got this wrong. This condition is actually caused by some interaction that we just didn't have the tools to investigate. Something like that, I think, would be pretty cool.
Yep. So that's why it's okay to still fund the research.
There you go. See, the way to tie it back into my snarky comment, Chuck. Yeah,
This is the first time in a while that we've been able to end on a note of saying, well, we solved something. We didn't give a very satisfactory explanation, but it's solved, and that's good. And I would also say that for anyone listening, if they have some questions about medicine and health, we're more than happy to put the research staff to work and see if we can find an interesting answer.
Yeah, the questions are coming in. We already have several lined up that we're going to tackle on the next episode. I think we actually have enough to make an episode out of it, which might be kind of fun instead of discussing our stories. But yeah, send us your questions, post them on social media. You can email them to us. Anything you want to know about science and health. And if it's within our purview, we will take a crack at answering it and try to give you some good information to make better decisions. As always, thank you for joining us. The article that Chuck just went through, it's called Does High Fructose Corn Syrup Feed the Wrong Bugs? A reader asks, we dig in. That is at ACSH.org. When you go there, click on the subscribe tab, give us your email. We will send you the articles we publish. The ones you read are usually the ones we talk about. We are also on social media. It's at ACSH.org on X. And then we're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well. Our colleague Anna Dolosky is doing great videos under the byline Matter of Facts from ACSH. So short little videos explaining science and health issues. Make sure you go like and subscribe and follow Anna's work. Thank you so much as always, and we will see you next time.